We're going to talk more about this visit now ahead of that speech with Middle East specialist Stephen Cook, who joins me from Washington. Stephen, thanks for taking the time to speak to us. Now, the political context, of course, is a tricky one for Netanyahu, not just the growing condemnation of the Israel-Hamas war. There's also all the focus now on the U.S. presidential election that was not planned when he scheduled this trip. How is he going to navigate all of that?
For Netanyahu is to solidify support primarily among Republicans in Congress. I think that he looks at the Democratic Party as one that is increasingly hostile to the state of Israel and is essentially doubling down. The invitation for the address to a joint session of Congress was given by the Republican Speaker of the House. And Netanyahu now for the first time is inserting himself in U.S. domestic politics.
So given all of that, I mean, is there any chance that he could be prepared to switch allegiance toward Donald Trump?
Well, it's not really a question of whether the Israeli prime minister switches allegiance or another, but he does seem clearly more comfortable with Republican presidents. Although President Donald Trump, when he was in office, had a dim view of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and secretly, during a series of elections that the Israelis held during Trump's tenure, hoped that one of his opponents would win.
Kamala Harris, of course, will not be at the speech today, in theory, due to a campaign event. Her people do say that that absence should not be interpreted as a change in any position on her part with regard to Israel. Is that really the case, do you think?
I think there's way too much reading into things about what the vice president or the president's schedule might be. These are two extremely busy people. And of course, Vice President Harris has just been thrust to the top of the presidential ticket. And her priority is to be elected president of the United States. She will meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu along with President Biden. So I don't think anybody should read too much into it. But of course, given the political situation in the United States, there is a lot of criticism of this, but I don't think it should be read as a snub of Netanyahu.
Do you think, though, there could be a difference between Kamala Harris's and Joe Biden's approach toward Israel?
Well, so far, the vice president has been a loyal soldier and supported the administration's policies. There's lots of speculation about what she might do if she were to become the president of the United States. There's very little to go on. She has been supportive of Israel throughout her career. At the same time, she has been, from time to time over the course of the last 10 months, more outspoken in her empathy for the plight of the Palestinian people. No doubt that is something that was coordinated with the president and the president's communications team. So I think that we won't see a tremendous change should she become the president of the United States. Kamala Harris, despite what people might say, is essentially well within the moderate center of American politics.
Well, how about this withdrawal of Joe Biden from the campaign? How do you think that might shift the dynamic between the president and Netanyahu? I mean, the two men are going to be meeting and talking tomorrow. Could this have any effect on future relations?
Yeah, there is. I don't think it would have any effect, broadly speaking, on future relations. The U.S.-Israel relationship remains quite strong, although it is changing, as you can see by the numbers of members of Congress who are not attending Netanyahu's speech to a joint session. But nevertheless, I think that the president will continue to demonstrate support for Israel's right to defend itself. He might mildly criticize Netanyahu for the conduct of the war, despite some notion that criticism of Israel is intensifying. In fact, official U.S. criticism of Israel's conduct in the Gaza Strip has actually diminished in recent weeks, certainly since the president ran into political trouble after his disastrous debate performance. But I think the president, if he were to be openly critical of the Israelis, would do some damage to Vice President Harris's campaign for the presidency, giving the Republicans a tremendous opportunity to take issue with the security of what many consider to be a very, very strong ally. So I think he'll probably avoid being open and public about whatever criticism he may have of the Israeli prime minister.
Indeed, but Joe Biden is also not going to make it easy for Netanyahu. For example, he's invited the relatives of some of the hostages still being held in Gaza to attend his meeting with Netanyahu on Thursday.
Point made. Point made. doesn't need to say much. The presence of those hostage families who have been critical of Netanyahu being there is an important symbolic point. It doesn't mean that the president needs to reinforce it by his words.
And of course, there have been protests as well there in Washington already to mark the arrival of Netanyahu. We're also seeing protests, of course, back home for him in Israel. I mean, just a quick word on the pressure he's facing at home.
Well, part of the reason why he accepted this invitation was to demonstrate to the Israeli people that he has not damaged the U.S.-Israel relationship. Of course, he has damaged the U.S.-Israel relationship, but nevertheless, he's going to bask in the support that he gets from particularly Republican members of Congress, but there still remains very strong support for Israel among Democrats. And lots of the motivation for him is to challenge his critics at home who've said that he has irretrievably damaged the strategic ties between Israel and the United States.